You know the person. Meeting ends at 6 p.m. Everyone else is drained, and they're heading straight to the gym, then cooking a full dinner, then somehow still texting back within minutes. It's tempting to write this off as just good genetics or willpower, but the real explanation is more interesting and more learnable than either of those. Here are 8 habits behind people who never seem to run out of energy. Habit 1. They protect their mornings like it's a job. Not necessarily waking up at 5 a.m., that's a myth worth retiring. What high-energy people actually do is protect the first 30 to 60 minutes of their day from other people's demands. No emails, no reactive scrolling, no absorbing someone else's urgency before they've even had coffee. Energy isn't just about output, it's about what you let drain you before the day has properly started. And controlling that opening window sets the tone for everything after. Habit 2. They treat sleep as non-negotiable infrastructure, not a flexible variable. This sounds obvious, but the distinction matters. Most people treat sleep as the thing that gets cut first when life gets busy. High-energy people treat it more like the thing that makes everything else possible, which means it gets protected even when it's inconvenient. Because they've learned through experience that a short night doesn't just cost them tiredness, it costs them decision-making quality, mood regulation, and physical resilience for days afterward. Habit 3, and this one surprises people. They move their bodies specifically to generate energy, not just to burn it off after they already have some. There's a well-documented physiological effect where moderate physical activity increases circulating energy and reduces fatigue more reliably than rest does in many situations. Sitting still to conserve energy often backfires, leading to sluggishness rather than preservation. People who never run out of energy have often internalized, sometimes without realizing it, that motion generates more of the very thing they're trying to protect. Let's pause here for a second, because here's a pattern interrupt worth sitting with. Think about the last time you felt utterly drained and reached for the couch instead of a walk. Did it actually help? For most people, the honest answer is no, not really. It just delayed the tiredness rather than resolving it. Habit 4. They're ruthless about decision fatigue, specifically by reducing the number of small daily decisions that drain mental energy without anyone noticing. Same breakfast most days. Default outfits, pre-decided responses to common requests. This isn't about being boring, it's about recognizing that every small choice pulls from the exact same finite pool of mental energy as bigger decisions do, and protecting that pool for things that actually matter. Habit 5. They recover in small, frequent doses, rather than waiting to crash and then binge recovering. Instead of pushing through an entire day at full intensity and collapsing at night, high-energy people build in short resets. A 5-minute walk between tasks, a genuinely quiet lunch away from screens, a few minutes of doing absolutely nothing between meetings. These micro-recoveries prevent the energy debt from accumulating in the first place, which is far more sustainable than trying to pay it all back at once. Habit 6. They're unusually honest with themselves about what actually drains them versus what they assume should drain them. A lot of people push through activities that quietly cost them enormous energy simply because those activities look productive or expected from the outside. High-energy people tend to audit this ruthlessly, noticing that a particular type of meeting, a particular person, a particular obligation consistently leaves them depleted, and adjusting their exposure to it rather than assuming they should just tough it out. Habit 7. They separate physical tiredness from emotional depletion, and they treat each one differently. This distinction gets missed constantly. Physical tiredness responds to rest and sleep. Emotional depletion, the kind that comes from suppressed frustration, unresolved conflict, or a mismatch between what you're doing and what actually matters to you, doesn't respond to rest the same way. It responds to actually addressing the underlying issue. People who seem to have endless energy have often just gotten better at diagnosing which kind of tired they're actually dealing with. Habit 8. And this one ties everything together. They protect one non-negotiable source of genuine enjoyment in their week. Something that isn't productive, isn't for anyone else, and exists purely because it recharges them. This could be a hobby, time outdoors, a specific kind of music, anything that generates energy rather than just consuming it. Most people treat this kind of thing as optional, the first item cut when the schedule gets tight. High-energy people treat it as load-bearing because they've noticed, through experience, what happens to their baseline energy when it disappears from the week entirely. Now here's the part worth sitting with. None of these 8 habits are about having more willpower or more raw stamina than everyone else. They're about energy management as an active skill rather than a passive resource you either have or don't. Most people treat energy like weather, something that happens to them. High-energy people treat it more like a budget, something they actively allocate, protect, and replenish on purpose. There's also something important to say about the myth of constant high energy, because it can create unrealistic comparison. Even people who seem to never run out of energy have low periods, off days, weeks where the tank runs closer to empty than usual. What actually distinguishes them isn't the total absence of fatigue, it's a faster recovery cycle, built from consistently applying habits like the ones we just covered, so that low periods stay shorter and shallower instead of spiraling into weeks of exhaustion. It's worth naming the emotional layer underneath all of this too. Chronic low energy is sometimes treated purely as a physical or logistical problem. More sleep, more exercise, better food, when the actual driver is something less visible. Unaddressed resentment, a values mismatch in how time is spent, or the low-grade cost of constantly performing a version of yourself that doesn't quite fit. No amount of morning routine optimization fixes a fundamentally misaligned life, and people who consistently have strong energy have often, at some point, done the harder work of addressing that mismatch directly, rather than just managing around it. Let's talk about how these habits actually show up in a normal workday, because the theory is easy to nod along with and harder to picture concretely. A high-energy person's morning might look almost boringly simple. No phone for the first 20 minutes, a short walk or stretch, a consistent breakfast they don't have to think about. By mid-morning, they've usually front-loaded their most demanding task while their mental energy is highest, rather than saving it for the afternoon when decision fatigue has already been chipping away for hours. Lunch is an actual break, not a working lunch eaten at a desk while scrolling. None of this looks dramatic from the outside. That's part of the point. Sustainable energy rarely looks impressive in the moment. It just compounds quietly over weeks. There's also a social dimension to energy management that doesn't get discussed enough. High-energy people tend to be surprisingly selective about who they spend unstructured time with, not out of coldness, but because they've noticed that certain relationships are net energy positive and others are quietly, consistently draining, regardless of how much they might value the person in principle. Protecting energy sometimes means having honest conversations about needing less contact with certain dynamics, not because the other person is bad, but because the interaction pattern itself costs more than it gives back. One more thing worth mentioning. High-energy people tend to notice the warning signs of depletion earlier than most. A slight shortness in their responses, a dip in patience, a pull toward mindless scrolling instead of anything restorative. Catching these signals early allows for a small course correction, an earlier bedtime, a cancelled non-essential commitment, before the deficit becomes large enough to require a much bigger recovery. Waiting until full burnout to respond is far more costly than adjusting at the first subtle sign that the tank is getting low. If your energy has felt inconsistent lately, the goal isn't to copy someone else's exact routine and expect the same results. It's to start noticing honestly what specifically drains you and what specifically restores you, because those answers are more individual than most energy advice admits. And building your own accurate map of that is worth far more than borrowing someone else's. Tell me in the comments which of these 8 habits you're already doing and which one you're going to try first. And if reading this list just made you a little tired, that's worth paying attention to too.